All right, welcome to the Drafting Room Builders. Today, stepping in as your chief architect, I'm going to show you exactly how to engineer an absolutely unshakable essay structure for the Cambridge AS Level Afrikaans 8679 Paper 2. Look, we're not here today to talk about basic grammar or simple vocabulary drills. No, we are here to talk about heavy-duty industrial-grade structural engineering. You are stepping onto a live construction site right now, and in this explainer, we are laser-focused on one thing: the content mark scheme. This specific scheme carries a massive 16 marks. Now, I want you to literally picture a structural integrity bar floating right in front of you, running from 0 to 100%. Right now, honestly, most students walk into this exam hall with a blueprint that hovers around a very dangerous 30% integrity. Why? Because they just don't understand the underlying architecture of what the Cambridge examiners actually demand from them. They treat an essay like a pile of loose bricks, just dumping raw information onto the page and desperately hoping the examiner will somehow build a beautiful house out of it. But let me tell you, that is absolutely not how high-level assessments work. To construct a high-rise response that survives the grading process, you need a meticulous blueprint, you need a reinforced steel frame of analysis, and you need the high-grade cement of evaluative reasoning. Okay, let's dive into this and get to work on engineering your path to the top band.
Before we even think about pouring any concrete today, you really need to deeply understand the stakes of this specific build. The content mark scheme we are looking at accounts for exactly 15% of your total paper 2 marks. I want to let that metric sink in for a second. 15%. That makes this single 16-mark assessment criteria a critical load-bearing pillar for your final grade. Think about it. If this pillar is cracked, if it's hollow on the inside, or if it's just built with substandard materials, your entire AS level of Afrikaans grade is at risk of catastrophic structural failure. You literally cannot just gloss over the content requirements and expect your fancy language skills alone to hold the whole building up. It doesn't work that way. The examiners are specifically assessing distinct cognitive domains here, and those domains require a heavy-duty structural foundation. When we go through the official site surveys, the examiner reports, this 15% margin is exactly where the difference between a mid-tier grade and an elite top band grade is forged. So we've got to treat these 16 marks with the absolute precision of a master architect.
So that brings us to the absolute most vital question on the site today. Why do so many essays just completely collapse under examiner stress testing? Well, we see it all the time. Let's imagine 2 typical builders on our site. We'll call them Builder 1, Alex, and Builder 2, Sam. Now, Alex walks into the exam hall, reads the prompt, and immediately starts stacking heavy bricks of raw memorized facts. Just a solid, dense block of terminology and information, paragraph after paragraph. But here is the architectural reality. Without a reinforced analytical steel frame running through those heavy bricks, the entire argument collapses under its own weight the second the examiner applies the marking criteria. Then you have Sam. Sam wants to put up all these shiny glass panels and decorative features, really complex, fancy Afrikaans words. But Sam entirely forgets to cement the foundational columns by actually answering the core command words. The examiner applies a stress test. They are actively looking for the why and the how, not just the what. And both Alex's unreinforced wall of text and Sam's glass house just crumble. They lack the flexibility to handle complex counter-arguments. They lack the internal wiring that connects one conceptual floor to the next. When an essay collapses, it's almost always because the student stayed entirely on the ground floor of basic knowledge, handing the examiner a pile of heavy bricks instead of erecting a load-bearing, dynamic high-rise.
So here is our master site plan for today's build. We're going to survey the blueprint challenge, erect our core structural pillars, weld together the procedural framework methodology, run the examiner stress tests, and finish up with a final inspection.
Phase 1. The Blueprint Challenge. Moving from flat descriptions to high-rise evaluations. The core theoretical foundation of this 16-mark content scheme rests on established principles of systematic analysis and evidence-based reasoning. You aren't just being asked to write grammatically correct sentences. You are being commanded to think like a structural analyst. The examiners view your response through a 3-tiered framework: descriptive, analytical, and evaluative levels. So what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, a descriptive structure, like the one our builder Alex was making, is basically like a flat, single-story shed. It just lists what happens. It states facts. This happened, and then this happened. Now, that little shed might keep the rain off in a lower-level exam, but it collapses instantly under the intense pressure of a high-tariff AS-level question. On the complete opposite side of the grid,
A top-band evaluative structure is a towering skyscraper. It doesn't just state facts, it actively questions assumptions. It considers dynamic alternative perspectives. It extracts raw data from the text, interprets complex relationships, and draws highly sophisticated evidence-based conclusions. Moving from the flat shed to the towering skyscraper requires you to actively justify your structural decisions with hard evidence. When an examiner looks at an evaluative structure, they see a candidate who understands how concepts transfer to entirely new, unfamiliar contexts. This is literally the difference between just reporting the news and engineering a bulletproof argument.
Phase 2. We're getting into the core structural pillars, specifically the assessment objectives.
Moving into the second phase of our build, we've got to lay down the foundational cement of our argument, using the specific cognitive domains required by the syllabus. Every single sentence you construct has to be anchored to one of these assessment objectives, or it's just decorative fluff. And before we look at the specific pillars, you absolutely have to understand this concept, the method mark strategy. This is a huge conceptual breakthrough for most students. Examiners are literally awarding you points for your structural blueprinting process, not just your final product. Let me repeat that because it's a real game changer. You are rewarded for the systematic process of your analysis. Think of it like a city inspector walking onto your construction site. If you've already put up all the drywall, how do they know your electrical wiring is up to code? They don't. They want to see your exposed pipework. They want to see your clear working. They need to see exactly how you moved from a raw piece of data to a complex, evaluated conclusion. If you just magically produce a conclusion out of thin air without showing the evidence-based reasoning that got you there, you're going to lose massive marks. The method mark strategy dictates that the how is just as important as the what. So let's look at the matrix for these three core pillars. First up is knowledge and understanding. This acts as your foundation. But the examiner requirement here isn't just about memorizing vocabulary, it's about showing transferable, connected concepts. The second pillar is analysis. This is your steel frame. To build this frame, you must extract data from the given texts and practically interpret the relationships between those data points. You are literally linking cause to effect, establishing the load-bearing beams of your essay. Finally, the third pillar is evaluation. I like to call this the high-rise flex. Real high-rise buildings actually need to sway slightly in the wind to avoid snapping, right? In your essay, flex comes from your ability to evaluate the quality of your evidence, identify its limitations, weigh alternative interpretations, and justify your ultimate decisions. Successful builders on this site demonstrate competence across all three of these domains simultaneously. You pour the foundation, you erect the steel frame, and you test the flex.
Phase 3. The procedural framework methodology. It's time to start erecting the steel frame. According to the syllabus, you have to weld your argument using an exact 5-step procedural framework. Now, a lot of students, like our friend Alex, make the fatal mistake of stopping at step 1. They just identify the key elements, dump a bunch of definitions onto the page, and call it a day. Others try to skip straight to step 4, throwing in fancy evaluative sentences without ever laying the groundwork or addressing the core command words. Both of those approaches lead to a total structural collapse. You absolutely must follow the sequence. First, identify the elements. Second, apply the contextual principles. Third, execute your analysis to show that clear working we talked about. Fourth, verify your results against the actual evidence. And fifth, present it all in the highly formal Afrikaans format required by Cambridge. You literally cannot skip a step here and expect the building to stay standing. Okay, mid-build site inspection pause. Before we secure this high-scoring paragraph framework and pour our final layer of text concrete, you need to make sure your own construction line is permanently reinforced. Hit that subscribe button for Ace the Exams, turn on those notifications, and lock in your weekly structural grade upgrades. Whether you're building an IGCSE foundation or setting up an A-level skyscraper, this channel is your primary grid. All right, inspection over. Let's get back to the drafting board.
Phase 4. Examiner's stress tests. Let's look at the top structural failures.
Going through the principal examiner reports, they have officially flagged 3 major structural defects across the board. The first catastrophic failure is confusing cause and effect relationships. This is like a student looking at a cracked wall and arguing that the crack caused the earthquake instead of the other way around. They failed to interpret the data correctly, which means their analytical steel frame is welded entirely backwards. The second major failure is forgetting to verify format and presentation rules. The syllabus states that your presentation has to follow strict conventions, proper headings, correct terminology, appropriate formats. If you bring the absolute best analysis in the world to the site, but completely ignore the structural format and conventions, your grade collapses. You're being assessed on your professional skills to apply these formats. And the third, which is perhaps the most fatal defect of all, is failing to tie answers specifically to the context given. This happens when students bring prefabricated generic filler to the site instead of custom building their response. I want you to listen to this critical alert directly from the official examiner site inspectors. Quote, "The classic mistake is providing generic answers not specific to the question context. Always link every point to the given scenario." End quote. Listen, examiners have highly sensitive radar for prepackaged, memorized essays. If you try to force a generic argument that you memorized the night before into a highly specific contextual scenario, your essay will fail the integrity check instantly. Your analysis must extract directly from the specific texts and tables provided in your exam. You cannot use generic filler as load-bearing material. It will literally shatter the moment the examiner applies pressure. Every single point has to link back to the scenario at hand. So to absolutely guarantee you avoid a collapse, you need to use the Peel blueprint. Imagine our builders Alex and Sam at the drafting board right now trying to construct a model response paragraph. Alex is saying, let's just fill this whole paragraph with a massive cement block of terminology. But Sam shakes their head and says, no way, if we don't leave hollow space for a dynamic counterargument, this structure has zero flexibility. And Sam is right. The Peel methodology is how you fix this. First is the point. This is your main thesis column, planted firmly into the ground. Next is evidence. You extract a specific quote or data point from the text and lift it into place as your steel beam. Third is explain. These are your high-tension rivets. You have to show exactly how that evidence beam supports the thesis column. You have to interpret the relationships. Finally, the link. You weld the whole structure back to the contextual scenario of the question, leaving just enough hollow space to acknowledge that dynamic counterargument. Riveting your extracted evidence directly to your contextual evaluation creates a perfectly engineered, load-bearing response block that will survive any examiner stress test.
Phase 5, the final inspection. It's time to evaluate the rebar. Remember those building regulations we started with? Toiling away on the ground floor of just knowledge? That won't get you here. Toiling on the steel frame of analysis gets you close, but it's still not enough. Topping out a 16-mark essay, reaching the absolute ceiling of the mark scheme, requires you to step back and evaluate the entire structure. The top-scoring candidates demonstrate true evaluative thinking. The syllabus is explicit about this. You must identify the limitations of the evidence you're using. What are the assumptions being made? You must evaluate alternative interpretations. If someone looked at this building from the other side of the street, what would they see? You've got to compare different approaches, and most importantly, provide a final, justified, evidence-based recommendation. You are acting as the ultimate site inspector of your own work here, justifying every single architectural decision with hard, verifiable evidence extracted right from the text. That is the true hallmark of the top band.
As we shut down the construction site for today, I want to run one live rebar stress test with you directly. Imagine a 60-second visual countdown timer on your desk. I want you to visualize your very next essay prompt. Look at the blank page. Before you pour a single drop of concrete, before you write a single Afrikaans word, I want you to ask yourself, does your mental blueprint actually have the load-bearing integrity of knowledge, analysis, and evaluation? Have you planned out the exact sequence of your Peel columns? Have you prepared the hollow space for alternative perspectives to ensure that high-rise flex? If you cannot clearly see the structural logic of your argument before you start writing, your building is already in danger of collapsing. Evaluate your blueprint against these 3 core pillars. Systematically apply the procedural framework we talked about today, and I guarantee your next essay will stand tall against any examiner stress test. Keep refining your structures, builders, and we'll see you in the next explainer.